the Sanders, of yourself and Sanders delegates around you during all of this?
I mean, I was very proud of myself in 2008 when I voted for President Obama, but I've been a very consistent critic of his policies, especially as someone who's a civil rights and constitutional lawyer, someone who is organizing around the very issues that I care about. Anything when it comes to drones and policies on Palestine, Israel, anything around, the Patriot Act and supporting, wiretapping. I mean, I've criticized President Obama plenty, and I think that Hillary is just going to continue the same status quo policy that we saw under the Obama administration.
Right. TM, what was your overall impression?
Yeah, actually, I would just add to that. I think Hillary might actually be worse than Obama because she's so much of a neophyte. I think you're going to have to speak
up a bit. It's very loud in here. Yeah. Oh. No, it's okay. It's just speak up.
She might actually be worse than Obama. She wanted to actually have a more direct intervention in Syria and was advocating for it, and even had the people that
no-fly zone in Syria.
Yeah, the people that support her kind of politics wrote that unprecedented letter trying to pressure Obama to make a move in Syria. So she could actually be worse in that respect. It's really quite a contrast, isn't it, comparing 4 years ago when they really had to bring out Bill Clinton to whip up the crowd a little bit, and then kind of have Obama almost sheepishly come out from behind and say thank you for connecting with the people. But the Democratic Party is riding high right now. After the Republican convention, they really feel like they've got this wrapped up. And the kind of triumphalism and positive we rule the world kind of rhetoric that you often see reserved for the Republicans, I thought the Democrats felt like this time, well, we can go full throttle with that same kind of an approach. When Biden was practically screaming into the microphone, we own the finish line. This is
one of the big fights that took place that's been pushed aside now was in the platform committee. Bernie Sanders appointed Cornel West to represent him at the platform committee, which I personally was actually somewhat surprised about, that they were willing to make Palestine and Israel such an issue at that point. It's been completely excluded now, but what was your take on that whole issue and what this is going to mean in terms of going forward? Not just Palestine, Israel, but the whole issue of foreign policy. A lot of Sanders people who they want, in theory, to support Clinton, are very concerned about Clinton and foreign policy.
I mean, Bernie Sanders validated the growing sentiment of pro-Palestinian human rights here in the United States of America. The polls are showing, Brookings Institute showed that 2/3 of young Americans are in support of the self-determination of the Palestinian people and human rights for Palestinian people. Bernie brought that conversation into the center of the campaign. In a New York State debate, he doubled down and really put Hillary in a very in a position where she still didn't answer the question, but just the idea of him putting that out there, I think, was important. Bernie didn't attend an AIPAC convention. There was really never a time when a major competitive candidate was like, actually, I'm not going to the AIPAC convention. That was a big message. And as a Jewish American candidate, and the only Jewish American candidate to not go to AIPAC, was a big deal. The Democratic Party is failing, and it failed me as a person who was here as a New York State delegate. The fact that they did not want to use the word occupation in the platform, something that has been used by Secretary of States, by the United Nations, by the Obama administration itself. The fact that we don't want to be peace brokers, that we don't want to put the Palestinian human rights. There's nothing radical about saying that Palestinians deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. So the Democratic Party needs to, if they want to be a forward-thinking party, they need to come up to where the young people are in this country. And the Bernie Sanders campaign showed me, and I went across the country from Madison, Wisconsin, to Santa Clara, California, to Patterson, New Jersey. You name the state, and I was in it. And these young people campaigning for Sanders, because I was a national surrogate also for the campaign. And everywhere I went, people were cheering Free Palestine the minute they saw me walk on that stage, and it was young people. So if the Democratic Party wants to fold in, real progressives, they want to fold in young people, they have to start talking about Palestine from the perspective of the humanity and the dignity of the Palestinian people.
I thought there was a very interesting distinction in the speeches tonight. I guess it was Kane that came out and talked about Hillary's role in using sanctions to force Iran into an agreement, where President Obama said it's the triumph of diplomacy that achieved the Iranian agreement. And there's a difference there. Like, one is the issue is, look how good we were at using coercion and connecting that with Hillary. And it goes back to something that happened in 2007. There was a vote in the Senate on whether to declare the Iranian Revolutionary Guard terrorist. And Hillary Clinton was almost the only senior Democrat that voted with the neocons to declare the Revolutionary Guard terrorist. And the counter-argument, which came from people like Webb and others, and Biden for that matter, was that if you declare them terrorist, then you're really declaring the government terrorist, and you'll never be able to negotiate with them. And Hillary votes for that, now takes credit for the deal. In fact, foreign policy is actually something vulnerable for her when she fights against Trump, because even though he's, in my opinion, a complete hypocrite on the issue of Iraq and Libya and Syria, there's a vulnerability there because she is responsible for a lot of the mess.
Yeah, and that is, of course, one of the problems that was frustrating for a lot of the people who got involved in the Bernie Sanders campaign, was the lack of attention to foreign policy or international issues. And that as Bernie's campaign went along, when he really got to kind of the middle part of his campaign, in a way it was like at his strongest. And that's when he began to move, for example, towards considering Palestinian rights in a way that you just had never heard a national candidate for so long. But he didn't really go after some of the results of her, neocon politics, only kind of some mentions and around the edges. He didn't make it a central part of his campaign. And I think if he had, he would have found resonance in the people who were the motive force for his campaign, which were the young people, like you were saying. An amazing generational divide in this election.
And I thought there was another weakness of his campaign, and it expresses itself again in what happened tonight. He didn't properly critique the economic policies of Barack Obama. You can point at Hillary and say, will you not have Goldman Sachs on your financial team? But you can't then say that and then praise President Obama for getting us out of the recession with exactly a Goldman Sachs financial team. And if you don't talk about the growing inequality over the 8 years of President Obama, which tilled the soil for the rise of Trump, then you're left with a half story. And tonight, with all this feel-good stuff about optimism and America and all the rest of this stuff, what are you going to say to the white working class that's voting for Trump that doesn't believe any of this? They're still worried about losing their house, and they're still worried about losing their job, and they're still worried about their wages. And all this praise for the last 8 years about the accomplishments, I don't get how that resonates with people, who are suffering.
I mean, signs that you saw on this convention since Monday were the no TPP signs, which is an issue that Donald Trump brings up over and over again, and is something that is very core and central to Bernie supporters. So the fact that Bernie supporters and Donald Trump supporters actually on that particular issue actually agree. And that actually scares me, because a lot of people who have these anxieties and fears are working class, white working class, people who have felt like they've been ignored by the liberal progressives who have not really focused on this issue, including President Obama and including Hillary. I mean, Tim Kaine has come around on this issue. He's evolved. But this was the central. If you saw the entire, people holding up, quote, opposition signs, they were 90% of them were the no TPP. So the Democratic Party is going to have to figure that one out, because that is a central piece of this conversation, because people are worried about jobs. People are worried about poverty. People are worried about feeding their families. And that is across the board, whether you're a Democrat, independent, libertarian. That's where people are right now. Like, how am I going to pay my rent? Somebody explain that to me. Yeah. And I think another area of weakness in the Democratic Party, if they want to also fold in more people, is criminal justice. Like, young black people are saying, okay, somebody explain to me how we're going to stop executing unarmed black men and women in the streets by law enforcement. So what's the plan? And there really hasn't anyone that's been addressing any specifics in this conversation. I'm worried about that group of people that's going to be. And I keep reminding people that more young people voted for Bernie than Donald Trump and Hillary combined. So these young people that were out on the streets so passionate don't come to the polls, right? Or go vote third party, which many of them are saying. we are in a dilemma right now. So the Democratic Party is going to have to get their messaging straight, and they're going to have to stop talking to your choir, which that's what they were doing in the last 3 days I've been here, and start talking to the skeptics. And back to like the Americanism and this like we're the best and greatest country on earth. Young people are not buying that. Young people are more open-minded. They understand their history. It's okay to go up there and say, you know what, we made bad mistakes. You know, we're not perfect. But we want to be on a journey with you. We want to be part of the revolution with you to make our country the greatest nation on earth. Young people are not buying this is the greatest nation on earth. That's not resonating with these young people.
Not just young people, this whole section of the working class, not only white for that matter. I got my shoe shine today, and my 87-year-old shoe shine guy who was tap dancing to prove to me what great shape he was in. I asked him, what do you make of this? He started giving me an entirely pro-Trump rant. Black shoe shine guy. Accusing Latinos of misusing food stamps. But mostly, he's just angry about the situation. And there's nothing in this thing tonight that's going to get people over that anger. You can't just have some lovely speeches that emotionally feel good, and somehow you're going to get over what people's feeling about their objective situation.
Well, there's a conundrum there, like that Bernie faced also. That if you need to go back to when you had the New Democrats come in, and that goes all the way back to the 1990s, and that was Bill Clinton. And they called themselves capital N, capital D, the New Democrats. And that was to have the financial sector then have the Democratic Party align with that more than they ever had, and abandon the manufacturing sector where they had been getting their votes from the unions and the laboring classes. And to do that, they wanted to wholesale, just destroy the manufacturing section of the United States and export it, because you had the technology to be able to move goods around the world in a way that you didn't before. But they had to split the Democratic Party to do that, and that's what Bill Clinton did, and it's been different ever since. So Bernie Sanders, if he's going to try to really come in and critique TPP, which is NAFTA on steroids, he has to critique NAFTA. And if he's going to talk about the inequality that since the collapse of the economy, he has to talk about how did that build up? Well, that's the buildup of the financial sector. And let's talk about what the single largest contribution that the Clintons have made to the United States so far is a new addition to American English, the Rust Belt. That didn't exist until the Clintons came about, and that was enabled by Bill and Hillary Clinton, who were both strong supporters. So Bernie, you could see him kind of like, well, how far am I going to go, seeing as how I am running inside the Democratic Party, to really criticize what has produced this disastrous results for all these hardworking people who, the solution was supposed to be education for everybody. Well, go to Flint, go to Detroit, go to Pennsylvania, Ohio. These are all these swing states. They didn't get education to get them out of it. It was a ruse. They have lousy service-paying jobs. They have to work 2 jobs to support their families. And you have this great facade here, but you look behind it, and people are hurting, and it's kind of like, you want some more of this? Really? That's why there was such an immediate resonance from people when Bernie Sanders came. And it is interesting how young people are able to say, no, we don't accept this, and we will jump with something different. And the older you get, people have less and less of a tendency to want to just stay with something that they're secure with,
When I interviewed Bernie, I asked him, what happens if you don't win this? What do you think your supporters are going to do? And will they support Hillary? And his answer was, if Hillary doesn't condemn the oligarchs, this is his words, then I don't know if they will. And after listening to this whole convention tonight, that if he doesn't get back to that message and say, yes, and I think he needs to say it outright, yes, Hillary represents a section of the oligarchs, but in my opinion, Trump is more dangerous. But if you don't tell people the truth of the stratum that controls the Democratic Party, which he more or less was during the campaign, when he was tactical about it, but it was pretty much implied that when he says, she needs to denounce the oligarchs, we kind of know that he thinks that she really is part of that. But if they don't get back to that language, maybe we will see a Trump presidency, because most people aren't experiencing this la-di-da that we heard tonight.
I mean, Bernie's in a conundrum, and I think, Bernie was heavily criticized for his criticism of Hillary. This idea that somehow he's the obstacle to the first woman president. When he talked about her qualifications or being unqualified, we knew exactly what he meant. We know that she was the Secretary of State. We knew that she was the First Lady. We knew what her track record was, but he was so criticized as if, she is an untouchable figure that cannot be criticized. And I think he got to the point where he will go back to that language. There is a negotiation here that Bernie is to be brought onto the campaign to campaign for Hillary. So he's not just doing this here. He's going to be traveling the country. And I know him well enough to know that he doesn't do teleprompters. I've been with him on the campaign trail. He doesn't read from a teleprompter. And depending on what audiences he's going to be talking to, depending on who shows up to the quote events with Bernie, he's going to go back to that language. He might not go that direct as you're saying, but he's going to go back to the top 1/10% of the 1%. Like, he's going to go into what he's been saying all along. Bernie doesn't change his messaging. You heard him here. The same speech he gave here is the same speech I heard 987 times during the campaign. The guy has been saying the same thing for 40 years, and he will continue to say it. Maybe he won't be that direct on Hillary, and I think that he doesn't want to be the guy that gets blamed if for some reason we don't win this election in November. He doesn't want to be the man who's going to be remembered because we're going to have a worse time under Trump, and people are going to remember the last thing that happened. They're not going to remember what led up to Trump, 40 years. They're going to remember, Bernie Sanders messed it up for all of us, and I don't think he wants to be that memory.
What do you say to people on the left, especially there's a lot of Sanders delegates who are furious, and they're saying it doesn't matter, Trump, it's not as dangerous as it's being portrayed. They're saying, don't use the fear factor against us. Clinton is unacceptable. And what do you make to that argument?
I tell people this. I said, look, if you don't live in a swing state, vote for whoever you want to vote for. Jill Stein, you want to write in Bernie, whatever your heart tells you to do it. If you live in a swing state, you have a responsibility with that vote, because those that are most marginalized in this country are going to be even more marginalized. So if you're a true social justice activist, if you're a true left progressive, you're like Black Lives Matter, I care about immigrant rights, I care about Muslims, if that's who you are, then if you are in a swing state in November, you are doing a disservice to the people that you claim to care about if you put us under a law and order fascist and racist regime like Trump. Trump is worse domestically. And if your priority is the American people and our social justice movement, there will be massive crackdowns. And I will tell you, the top of the movements, the most visible of us, are going down. And Trump has made that very clear. The fact that Rudy Giuliani is on the table to become the head of the Department of Homeland Security should really scare anyone. So I'm not trying to tell people vote based on fear. I'm trying to tell you to vote based on reality. And as a Muslim American, as someone who organizes with black communities, undocumented communities, Donald Trump's supporters, his advisors, forget Trump, put Trump to the side. If you see the people that are around him, they are very scary people who are out to get anyone who does not believe in a, quote, predominantly white America.
All right. Do you want a last comment?
It would just be interesting to be able to ask Bernie Sanders, well, suppose Jeb Bush had become the nominee. How differently would you be presenting what people should be doing in the election?
Meaning it wouldn't...
If he didn't have someone that's crazy and as scary as Trump, that one can use as an excuse to then rally behind the Democratic Party candidate, would you say to people that, well, you should maybe put your energy into other things than not worry about the presidential election, because it does not make that much difference? It's just a hypothetical that we'll never know.
This time it does, you think? All right, thanks very much for joining us. And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.